This is Jerry Howard, and I am delighted to be introducing my friend and author, Lili Anolik. Uh, the word for Lily is epistle. Another word is a complete and total delight. Um, are you blushing yet, Lily?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, good. Keep doing that. Um, in addition to that, Lily is just a terrific journalist and author. Who has written a lot for Vanity Fair and now writes for a very good email magazine called Airmail, not coincidentally founded by Graydon Carter. Um, the book that we'll be talking about today, though, is her book, Hollywood's Eve, Eve Babitz and the Secret History of LA. Um, I will leave it to Katie and Lily to tell you all about Eve Babitz, but she is just an amazingly cool and seductive and influential figure in the culture of Los Angeles when Los Angeles culture was at its absolute peak of influence. And uh, her rediscovery is absolutely the handiwork of Lily. All of her books were out of print. Eve Babitz's books, that is to say, when Lily first found out that she was alive and living in LA. Um, an outfit called the New York Review of Books Classics um, jumped on these books and reissued it. And Eve Babitz went um, in a really startlingly short amount of time from being a total back number to the it girl of the moment, and to the point where a reasonable case can be made that Eve Babitz is replacing Joan Didion as the major literary voice of Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So um, Lily will tell you all about Eve Babitz and the story. The people who are dialing in know who Katie Rosman is. I do want to say that if you're a regular reader of the New York Times, Katie is just like killing it. Um, she single-handedly may destroy the health and wellness industry in the United States,
Well,
which would be a good thing. Anyway, she's writing these pieces that are very, very deeply reported and high impact. And she is our interviewer for tonight. So I will leave it to these two accomplished women to get on with it.
Thanks,
thank
Jerry.
thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much. And Lily, it's great to be here with you, and I'm so glad that we're able to do it after COVID tried to intervene.
Yes.
There were so many forces that tried to keep us apart, and now we have bested them all, and we're really happy to have you here.
Nothing can stop us now. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, Jerry gave a great introduction to Eve, who, like, I think of her like she's like out of a Joni Mitchell song.
Yeah.
And cool, which was the first word that Jerry used to describe her, really cool and seductive, really are two perfect words. So why don't before we talk about the book itself, introduce us to Eve Babitz.
Evie. Well, can I tell you how I found her? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was reading, Joe Esterhaus, the
And
screenwriter.
not personally, but yes.
He did like Showgirls and Basic Instinct, and he wrote a bunch of memoirs, and he wrote one called Hollywood. He would start each chapter with a quote, and there was this great quote, about Los Angeles and sex, Eve's specialties. And I was so kind of knocked out by it. I had to find out who this woman was because I read a ton of LA like literature, consider myself pretty knowledgeable, and she was a new one on me. And this would have been maybe 2010. And so I kind of bought her book secondhand, and I was so insane for her, you know. She seemed like this totally original American voice to me, and purely Hollywood, and but she was out of print, and there was like no information on her. And I happened to have a younger brother, and he was at USC for business school at the time, so I would visit him, and she was in the white pages, or like, yeah, the white pages. That's where you find humans, not businesses, right? Because you couldn't, there was no social media. There was no social media presence. There was no Twitter, no Facebook, no MySpace, nothing. And I just kind of walked over a letter to her. She didn't answer me, but I kept writing her. And yeah, I mean, I guess just there was like very little personal information out there about her, but what was there was so kind of seductive. It was like her kind of the thing that made her name originally. It was when she was 20 years old, and she posed naked playing chess with Marcel Duchamp. And she's completely naked, and she's very, like a 50s bombshell, enormous breasts. And I know this because she told me she was taking birth control pills for the one and only time in her life. So I think she was bigger than a double D. But she had this kind of haircut. So Julian Wasser was the photographer who took the picture, and he let her pick which photo he was going to use. And she chose one that obscured her face. So it was this kind of moment where it was kind of exhibitionist but self-effacing at the same time, which is sort of what she's like, So that's who she was. I mean, she was kind of a pinup, like the thinking man's pinup, and she wrote these kind of great books that no one seemed to know about. That's who she was to me originally. Now she is something quite much bigger. I think she is replacing Joan Didion, which is just very exciting to me. I mean, Joan Didion is great, but we need something else. I think we need another voice.
And how did she engage with you in letters? Did it become sort of
God, no.
Okay.
God, no, nothing. So a couple years went by with nothing, and I would send her postcards of like, I knew which movie star she liked. I knew she liked Kim Novak. I knew she liked Marlon Brando. Did a real thing for Tony Curtis, so I would send her these kind of movie star postcards, but I got nowhere. And I when I was writing her in 2010, so I write for Vanity Fair. I actually still write for Vanity Fair with Braden's Airmail as well, but both. But kind of this was pre me getting published, but kind of in those, like from 2010 to 2014, I started to get published, and Vanity Fair let me pitch them, and I pitched them a story on Eve, and they went for it. So, and she still wouldn't respond to me. So I insinuated myself into her life. I became close with her sister, her cousins. She had sex with many, many men. So it was easy to kind of like find old boyfriends. And I got close with the old boyfriends. And then she got curious. And one of her boyfriends is the artist Ed Ruscha, the LA artist. But he was kind of her guy in the 60s for about a minute. But then she was very seriously involved with his younger brother, Paul. And she stayed kind of involved with him, meaning not romantically, but just they stayed friends. And so one day she called him and she said, "Tell Lili she can take me out to lunch tomorrow." So I just got on the plane and I took her to lunch, and that's sort of how it started.
Where'd you go?
We went to go to this. It's gone now. It's called like Shortcuts, and it was like a kind of an upscale burger place in the farmers market. And she wanted to go because the woman who opened it had gotten wiped out by Bernie Madoff. And for whatever reason, that was appealing to her. And we went there. I lasted 20 minutes with her. She wouldn't look at me. She just slammed the food down, barely spoke to me. So I thought it was over. But at the end of that meal, she said she wanted me to take her for barbecue next time. So, and then, she was, people aren't going to know maybe, but she was in a very bad fire in 1997. She was, she'd gone through a huge kind of drug phase. She actually cleaned up her act in the early 80s. This was in 97, and she was clean and sober, but she was smoking a cigar in the car, and she lit it, and she set herself on fire. So almost didn't survive. It was 50-50. And she survived, but she kind of didn't survive. She completely stopped writing, and she stopped seeing people, and she's kind of in enormous physical discomfort, and kind of crazy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. So we didn't really connect in person, but she would take all my phone calls, and she was great on the phone. So we would talk every day, and that's sort of how it worked.
And what is what is or what was her relationship with Joan Didion?
Oh, that's such a great question. So they ran in the same social crowd. There was this
Mhm.
kind of mysterious guy. I always like these people who are kind of shadow figures and they connect everyone and they know everyone, but they don't seem to have a function other than that. And
Mhm.
Earl McGrath was like this, and he was married to some kind of Italian royalty. She was a duchess or something, or countess or something, but seems as though he was mostly gay. Um, and Joan Didion dedicates the White Album to him. He
Mhm.
was very, and like he died maybe a year and a half ago, and like Harrison Ford paid for his funeral or something. He just knew everybody. He was one of those guys who kind of connected everybody, and he was like the right hand man of Ahmet Erdogan, who ran Atlantic, and
Mhm.
Ahmet was just kind of a real force for a period, and Ahmet was one of Eve's boyfriends, I guess. He had a wife. Anyway, Earl had this kind of whole kind of social crew, and it was Harrison Ford, who was still at that time a carpenter and pot dealer. It was Joan Didion. It was Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, and it was even Joan and a bunch of artists. And so socially, Eve and Joan were close. And Eve had written her first novel at 19 years old, and she sent it to Joseph Heller. She sent him this kind of mash note that said something like, "Dear Joseph Heller," and it was just when he had just published Catch 22, so he was like the biggest writer in America. She wrote him this mash note that said, I'm a stacked Hollywood blonde, 19, and I'm sitting on a bench in a wet bathing suit. I've written a novel, and of course he wanted to see the novel, and he tried to help her get it published. His editor, I think, was Robert Gottlieb, and Robert.
That's a really good letter to an editor. I
Isn't
will
it?
not try it in 2020, but that's a good letter.
Oh, it's a great letter. Oh, she's amazing. And she kind of went to Hollywood High, and it was like Hollywood High was like your dream of what Hollywood High would be then. It was like Tuesday Weld was there, and the woman who would become Linda Evans, I think she had a different name, and kind of all these kind of beautiful girls. Stephanie Powers. I don't know. She had a show in the 80s. Anyway, there were these just kind of glorious kind of creatures who went there, and they were all sexually sophisticated, and they were all kind of like with married men, and they knew how to operate. They knew how to like maximize their good teenage looks. And
Yeah.
Evie kind of learned that. Which is why I think the mash note to Joseph Heller. But she kind of stopped when that didn't work with Joseph Heller, when that novel didn't get published. She she was a visual artist for a number of years, and that's what she was focused on. And she did album covers and was a collagist. Um, but then at 27, had some kind of crisis of confidence and wrote a story about those girls at Hollywood High Peak. And she showed it to Joan, and Joan thought it was just great. And Joan gave it to Grover Lewis, who was an editor at Rolling Stone, who also became a boyfriend of Eve's. And it was published, and that sort of started her. So Joan really helped her out.
And did they remain? It seemed I feel like there was some indication that maybe they didn't remain.
Well, Evie's so crazy. I mean, the drugs were just so out of control, and I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect she got too messy for Joan to deal with. Because all the way
Mhm.
up to, she wrote a novel, and I don't think she's a good novelist. I think she's great at the short stuff, but she wrote a novel called L.A. Woman, which she wrote kind of when she was at her most drugged out, and I kind of think it's her worst book. But and I think Knopf had maybe dropped her at that point. She was just acting pretty crazy, and John Gregory Dunn, Joan's husband, kind of got her into Simon and Schuster and really helped her. So they were really good to her. I mean, they were out a lot. And she's
Okay.
exhausting, I'm sure that they were nice.
Yeah. And was she exhausting to you? I mean, had she
No,
how
she
was
wasn't on.
she how was she to deal with?
Well, like in ways she was great because she would always take my calls no matter what, and she answers
Mhm.
every question. But I always think of her like as kind of like an elf from like a fairy tale. Like she'll tell you anything, but you have to know how to ask in the right way. So that
Mhm.
letter to Joseph Heller, which that was in, so I first wrote about Eve for Vanity Fair, and that detail kind of got picked up by so many places. but it wasn't Eve who told me. It was when she was in one of her coke rages, she fired one agent and took kind of, I think it was Annie Leibovitz, who'd been her girlfriend's lawyer, and Blitman, and Nan represented her for a very short period. But Nan told me about this letter, and then I asked Eve, and she told me everything about, her thing with Joseph Heller. So she was great because she would always answer everything, but you have to know her, and she had a kind of strange code, and like I think I say this in the book. When she would be describing a man, and she said he doesn't like baseball, that meant he was gay. Like, it would be weird code, so it's like you had to really know her to be able to decipher. And she was kind of incapable of, like, she was famous for having these like telephone relationships with old boyfriends. Like, she was great on the telephone, and one of her old lovers, Paul Rocher, would talk about unwinding her telephone cord, where she'd go walk around and around, and the cord would get all tangled. He liked being the guy in her bed while she was talking with her other guys on the phone. And so she was obviously great, at reciprocity, like at talking, but she wasn't that way. She would kind of answer questions, but we never really spoke. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes, as a journalist, the person themselves cannot be the best source.
Yeah, totally.
And you just have to do so much reporting to sort of learn about the person from other people. And then, of course, you bring it to them. But
no, Katie, that's such a great point. He wasn't like, well, we were talking a little bit before when we were emailing. I was doing this podcast on Tracy Lords, and I never really wanted to interview Tracy because I feel like a defense attorney, like, you get stuck with the person's story, and I knew what her story was, and I knew it wasn't true. But with Eve, it's different. Eve will answer anything, and she'll answer honestly. So she's like a really good source, but she's tricky because you got to know how to ask. Yes.
So tell us, so you wrote this story for Vanity Fair, and describe what happened after. Sort of like immediate, connected to the Vanity Fair story.
So it was funny because that was the first time I'd ever done a big story. I'd never written for a glossy, nothing like that, and it was a big, like 6,000 words, and it was for the Hollywood issue, and all of a sudden it was weird. It was like my obsession was starting to infect other people. Like, nobody knew. I mean, I would ask, and nobody knew her. I mean, I know people did, but definitely no one my age knew her. And beyond that, like, I remember when I started interviewing for this, like, when I would interview, like, people from the 70s who kind of knew her, and half of them were really quite dismissive, talked about her like she was a bimbo, so it was like, and then it was amazing because she's kind of, I mean, I look at this life, and she's had so many lives. She's kind of started out, she was this kind of child of Hollywood, going to Hollywood High, and she had these parents, and her father was a studio musician at 20th Century Fox. So you can hear his violin in the Psycho score, he's a violinist.
Uh-huh.
It was kind of wild, but he was also kind of classically trained, and he did the violin fingering for Stravinsky, who was Evie's godfather. And her mom had kind of a salon in the house, and it was kind of high art and European. And then, she had Hollywood High, and she was kind of coming up through this, and she's the nude model for Julian Wasser and Stomp, and then she's kind of this kind of groupie for a while. She slept with so many famous people. It was Morrison, it was Ed Ruscha, it was Steve Martin, Harrison Ford, Annie Leibovitz, Warren Zevon. It was so many. All the Eagles, or half the Eagles. The group. I never got the figure clear, but there was a bunch of them.
A lot of Eagles.
A lot of Eagles, And her sister was like, I think her sister was with Don Henley, and she was with Glenn Frey, so it was like totally complicated. And then she did those kind of album covers for Buffalo Springfield. Then comes the writing career. Mm-hmm. Then she's kind of this California horse. Oh, I lost you.
Oh, where is everybody?
Okay.
Are we here? Someone's sharing their screen.
I still see you. So she becomes this kind of California horror story, with the fire. And then she kind of, after that article came out, and look, she would have gotten rediscovered no matter what, but I think it probably would have happened after she died. And now she's kind of in this moment where she's kind of she's like this kind of attenuated literary celebrity, in her 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Is she aware of it?
Yeah, she's aware of it. But it's like, I think it's something she very much wanted and wants, but the actuality of it, she's kind of ambivalent about. she said to me, publicity is great, but not in your 70s.
Hmm.
So I think it's weird for her. And she's pretty far gone. I mean, honestly, she's just really far gone, and she really deteriorated from 2012, which is when I finally kind of. She was not in great shape in 2012, but kind of, it's gotten worse.
And, she I mean, she seems like she was a real it girl, with
Yeah.
talent, sort of like an it girl with talent. And I wonder how there's something about her, and I don't mean to diminish her by saying this at all, actually, but that like connects to sort of like the Instagram it girls, the sort of visual, who know how to present themselves visually, and like the caption memoirists who
Yeah.
often end up getting book deals. So it's not, a terrible comparison. But is there any line from her to the sort of internet literary ingenue?
Well, I mean, to me, what I liked about her is kind of her monstrous quality. Um, she's not calculating in those ways. I mean, to me, she's like a real artist. And she's in the gutter and she's at the top. And even her craziness, even when I met her and she was in such a bad way, like there was nothing kind of modulated or middle class about her ever.
Mm-hmm.
And those girls seem more like operators to me. And Evie collected people. Like I always think about this. Like I never would consider her a groupie. That was always the first word she used to describe herself with me,
Mm-hmm.
groupie. But it was never like that. I mean, it was always inside the role and outside the role. And she never wanted to be these guys' girlfriends. That was never the goal. She would collect them and it would be a one night stand and then she'd want them out of her bed. And I always would laugh. Like boyfriends would tell me that she wrote in the morning. So no matter how fucked up she got, how debauched the night before was at 7 o'clock, she used to make cowboy coffee. Her mom was from the Texas oil fields and
Okay.
it tasted great, but she would slam the pot, the spoon against the pot in their ears because it was time for them to go. You know what I mean? So she was
Uh,
very focused on herself. I mean, she was selfish in that way of an artist. You know, an extreme. She was an extreme person.
wow. Well, yeah, the list of, I mean, I wrote down Jim Morrison, Paul Butterfield, Harrison Ford, Annie
She never
Leibovitz.
got Paul. She never got Paul. She loved Paul Butterfield and
She never got
never
him.
got him.
Never. He was never a notch on her
Never,
bedposter.
never.
Um, and so, why do you think she's resonating now?
Well, I have my own theories about this. Like, I always felt that. I mean, I said this before, but like my own feeling is, well, we're kind of in super ego times. Like, we're in kind of a repressive moment. Um, it's not that fun. Relations between the sexes are pretty tense. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a humorless time. I mean, I'm sounding like I'm putting the time down. It's all shit that needs to happen, but we're just in kind of an uptight moment.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like an id, and I feel like she's like the mood underneath the mood. Do you know? Like I always think of like Joan Didion kind of catches on at the height of like the free love, hippy dippy. I think 1967 is when Slouching Toward Bethlehem comes out, and she's kind of dour and kind of doomy, and get the headaches, and she sees darkness, and that book becomes a cultural touchstone. So I felt like she was tapping into the mood under the mood, and somehow
Mm-hmm.
that's going on with Eve. I also just feel like the world needs Joan and Eve. Somehow they balance each other out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Betty and Veronica.
yeah. Oh my God, completely. They need each other.
And she is, but I mean, she is very visual. I mean, it somehow in our image obsessed
Yeah,
moment with Instagram. I mean, she's a bit of a Instagram hero too. I
for
mean, yeah,
sure.
young women who, I mean, she's a bit of a heroine to them, don't you
Oh my
think?
God, no question. And I'll see like one of the young Jenners, like Kylie, who's
Hmm.
reading Sex and Rage. It's great. But like my own suspicion, because I mean, my own feeling is that by far her best book is Slow Days, Fast Company. But the book kind of young people seem to gravitate to is Sex and Rage, which is not a good novel, but it's got a great title. So I suspect she's kind of a heroine, like a cultural heroine more than a
Yeah.
literary. That's my own guess. What do you think?
I think that's right. I think the covers look good on Instagram. The
Yeah.
association, it's, associating themselves with her and her, cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's totally what's going on.
And the photo with Marcel Duchamp also, it's so unself-conscious,
Oh, it's great.
which
Yeah.
is really fabulous and not something that we see a lot of in our very sort of posed and curated and branded world.
Totally.
Is she unself-conscious? Was she?
Yeah, I think there was kind of a she let it all hang out kind of quality to her, and that she had that kind of female macho quality. Like her sex energy was really high. Um, yeah, and she was never a pleaser. Like I would hear this from men kind of again and again. She was difficult, like um, she would kind of present herself as that kind of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was her favorite artist. She loved Georgia O'Keeffe. Marilyn Monroe she saw as an artist, and she has that kind of self-presentation, and she loved sex and she loved men and all that kind of stuff was genuine. Um, but she was also hidden and difficult. I mean, I also suspect like people like her too because I mean she's the pleasure principle. And you can feel it in her writing. It has that kind of discursive. Like I always think of Joan Didion. I mean, um, what's her famous California book? Why am I not thinking of the title? The
Oh,
famous, just
um,
so weird.
I don't know, Jerry?
Play it as it lays.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Play it as it lays.
Yeah.
Which has this kind of like it's unifocal and it's Hollywood is Sodom and Gomorrah and it's kind of dark tunnel vision and you go into like Slow Days Fast Company and it takes in all of LA. It starts in Bakersfield, it goes to Palm Springs, it goes to Laguna. It just and there's this kind of easygoing, kind of plot infused, kind of sexual rondelay quality that's just it's like so appealing.
Hmm.
And she gets that kind of side of Los Angeles. I'm rambling, but I just suspect people are just kind of drawn to all that about her.
Yeah.
Very appealing.
Yeah, it does all make me think of a Joni Mitchell song. I mean,
Yeah,
it really does. Sort of all that's so alluring about California from that time. Um,
absolutely.
and so how was the process so the piece comes out, the article comes out, and you get a book deal. What was the process of writing and presumably doing a lot of additional reporting? Was it tough? Was it easy? Did it take a long time? Did it flow?
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, the book deal that I got, I mean, I just thought I was going to use her as the connector to all parts of LA that I liked. She was like, there was going to be 15,000 words on Eve, and then it was going to be things that flowed from Eve, a piece on Chet Baker, a piece on Joan Didion, a piece on Pauline Kael. Like, it was going to be all this stuff of O.J. Simpson, all these kind of things. And then she took over. So what I what started at 15,000 words became 65,000 words, and then I just lopped off the second half of the book and just did Evie. So it morphed. It morphed. I mean, she just took over. But I hadn't discharged. My obsession with her was pretty deep, and it wasn't discharged in an article. It just wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough. So the book, I didn't think it was going to be a book just on Eve, but that's what it became. You know.
And what do you mean she took over? Your obsession with her took over? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yes. I mean, she became bigger to me. She became bigger. I ended up thinking. I thought she was kind of a fascinating minor figure maybe when I started, and then I didn't think that. Then I thought she was a major figure. Um, um, yeah, I mean, I like this kind of off the wall discursive life she led. I liked what she became. I mean, even as upsetting as it was, like seeing her in the present day, I liked the whole thing. You know.
and was it easy to do because you were so captivated by her?
Yeah, it wasn't a problem. I mean, for me, if I'm going to do something, I have to just totally like being in love. It's like the same thing. You
Hmm.
be totally enraptured, and I kind of was with her, and it wasn't a problem. And she was accessible to me in this way that was so convenient. Like she just was there at the phone, whatever time I called, and she would answer. So it was great, and you know, and I loved like I liked everyone who was around her. I mean, I just did like a long thing for Vanity Fair and a guy who ended up just dying a few weeks ago, but this guy, Paul Fortune, and everybody around her was like everybody around her was interesting and an artist and odd, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
it was like heaven. It was like, and it was like the LA that I always thought was there. It was like this hidden LA. And, you know, once you got in through her, it was like a passport to everything that I was interested in, at least.
Did she ask you about you?
Never. And
Never.
never. And what was really crazy is she's so boy crazy. So I have this younger brother I mentioned who was at USC who's like extremely handsome.
Mm-hmm.
And I one time got him to pick me up when I was out with her. And she called me Lulu. She called me all kinds of names. She never got my name right. She looked at him and she said, I know you. You're the one who used to play the jukebox at Astro. So when he was in USC 3 years before, he used to go to a hamburger place and play the jukebox. And she'd spotted him there and she remembered him 3 years later. And she was
Wow.
totally out of it. So things made an impression. I just wasn't one of them. And she'd love it. And I would get him, I would use him all the time. I would have him drive us around and put her in a good mood. So, yeah, I was exploitive of him, I guess.
Well, you know, that's all right. It's
okay,
for it's for great art. It's
that was my
okay
feeling.
it's for great art. And then, you know, when the book was done, then I mean, how's your obsession now? Are you disgorged
No,
of
I'm
it
on to
or?
other shit. I'm onto other shit, but it's like I'll still hear stuff a woman did also for Scribner did a book on Alice Adams, and she wrote me a note. We didn't know each other, but through editors, she wrote me a note, and she found a letter from Eve to Alice Adams, and they'd not met. And at the very last line said, "P.S. Trying to get Joe Heller start a rumor that I've gone to Switzerland to get my hymen resewn." It's just so great, you know? You know, you'll find out these other things about her. It's just, and like, I'm sure I said this in the book. My memory is bad right now, but like, we've been talking like every day for like 5 years, and she just suddenly lets it slip that she was in The Godfather too, you know? Like, she thought it was The Godfather, but I found her, she was an extra in this scene, this big court scene in Godfather 2. She just like appears in these kind of weird contexts, you know? And there she is. And she's the one person, yeah, and she's the one person wearing a polka dot shirt, so you totally see her, you know? Maybe.
And so you have a new podcast out about Tracy Lords. Tell us about that.
Well, what's so funny is like, so Tracy Lords, it's kind of a real life mystery and noir about Tracy Lords she was an adult star in the 1986 underage scandal. So it's in the porn world. It's in the Valley, so still LA. But what made me think it was faded was my first porn interview was with a porn star from the 70s named Herschel Savage, and he gave me his address, and I couldn't believe it. He lives across the street from Eve.
Wow.
We can see into each other's windows.
Wow.
So it felt faded. But yeah, so the podcast is on Tracy. And, you know, it's funny because I think of Tracy and Eve as a little bit similar just because there's a pornographic quality to Eve because, you know, her initial fame was, you know, for being naked. So, they're both kind of artists in odd ways. So it's so nice of you to ask me about that. But yeah, I'm doing that now.
And so
you're going to listen on your walk.
You know what I will listen to it for sure. Tell us a bit about, you know, what is enticing about that story to you.
Well, so I broke into print right at the time I was, you know, stalking Eve. I was friends with Al Goldstein. Does that name mean anything to you? Screw Magazine.
Yeah, Screw Magazine. Yeah.
He knew my husband. My husband was not my husband then, he was my boyfriend, but he was like he's a doctor and he was doing his residency at NYU and he was at the Veterans Hospital, and Al used to ask him to take him out for Chinese food. So we did, and I ended up writing about Al for the New York Observer. So I broke into print writing about kind of the golden age of porn, and I was in that world for about a year and a half, and I would hear about Tracy all the time. The adult industry was so angry with her, and they talked about her like this kind of femme fatale vamp who had exploited them. You know, she was the underage girl, but somehow they felt that she'd taken advantage of them. And I love a noir, you know. So that's sort of what this is, and it's kind of finding out what happened. But they're similar. The two women are similar, and you know, of course, I'm obsessed with her too.
And how are they similar? Just in the I mean, I guess there's sort of a confidence and using sex not in the way women stereotypically,
Yeah.
when they used it.
Yeah, all that is completely true, and there's kind of a dominant quality to them. There's beauty and sexuality, and I guess look, I like Hollywood stories. And this to me, it's like Eve's a Hollywood story. She had no interest in the movies, but she's a total Hollywood story. And same with Tracy. And I think of them as like Lana Turner getting discovered at Schwab's drugstore, only with a twist. Instead of
Uh-huh.
like Tracy, instead of getting discovered in Schwab's, goes to Jim South's nude modeling agency at 15 with a fake ID and kind of blows up the industry. And they're secretive people, and I just think they're artists in odd ways, ways that they're just so appealing to me. And I think of them both as completely kind of both creative and destructive, and your feelings about them, they're very ambivalent, compromised, and I love them. I mean, and I love the Tracy one particularly just because it's like Double Indemnity or something,
Yeah.
but with a very pungent setting. So yes, but thank you for asking me about it.
And so is Eve still writing?
Oh gosh, no. Eve hasn't written since the fire. She
Then
tried she tried to actually write about the fire, and there were kind of a number of false starts. Sarah Kramer did a really kind of brilliant job editing that book. I used to it's a collection of Eve's kind of unpublished shorter work, and it's really great. I mean, it's great. But I used to be charming was her essay about the fire. And I read all the drafts of it, like 60 or so pages, and it was so upsetting to read. I mean, it wrecked my mood for like 3 days. She was in such physical agony.
Mhm.
Um, but she was kind of gone. I mean, I feel like that just kind of her, and she stopped. I mean, she was famously social, and she stopped seeing people, and she stopped writing.
Just became a total recluse and turned inward.
Turned inward, and she's like, but like it's wilder than that. Like the last time I saw her, I took her to Musso's, for the sand dabs, which she still loves. And then
Mhm.
she wanted me to take her to the 99-cent store in Hollywood, which is very, very dicey. It's pretty much just speakers. It's like meth addicts. It's kind of a scary store.
Mhm.
And we're in there for like 3 hours, and she treats me like it's like I'm her mistress. Or she's my mistress. I just buy her things. She likes that. She likes cheap stuff. She wanted me to buy her 10 nail clippers, fingernail clippers. It was crazy, but we're in there, and she's kind of going through the aisles and just kind of, she's scaring the tweakers. So she's like extreme. But she's absorbed. She reads all the time. I send her books. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Of
Did you buy her the 10 nail clippers?
course I did. Anything
Okay.
she wants. I buy her whatever she wants. Mostly it's chocolates and stuff like that, but it's books. Like she does. She likes, she likes MAGA hats. I buy her MAGA hats.
Oh yeah, tell us about her. She's very conservative politically.
I mean, it's just she's like the opposite of conservative, but she's right wing, I guess you would say.
Okay.
But like she's not all there. I mean, the thing is, it's not out of character. She's so extreme. I mean, she grew up in like a communist household and writing life. I mean, the fire happened when she was in her mid 50s, a little past her mid 50s. So she was a fully formed person in her all that time. She was a liberal person, just not engaged by politics. I don't know how much weight you give that, but even her weird right wingness is like it has its weird charms. Like she wants me to buy her a shirt, and she'll say she wants the blue of Melania Trump's eyes. It's always kind of funny and personal and strange, and
Is it is
yeah.
it like the cult of personality of the Trumps more
I
than the
don't think I
politics?
really think she's completely gone. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like,
Okay.
she can't have a TV in her house, so she had radio, and I think she got addicted to right wing radio. She's an addictive personality,
Hmm.
but I don't. It's totally out of character to what she was up to the fire. So I just don't know how much to put in it.
Okay.
You know, I don't know.
And as a journalist, is that hard feeling like the person you're writing about isn't there? Like, is there like,
Yes.
wanting to not exploit her? How do you manage that?
Well, it's like the exploitation thing's really interesting because it was like, how much of her do I reveal in the present day? And her sister was very angry with me initially, wanted to murder me, in fact, when I showed her the book.
Wow.
But she got over it really quick, and it's just
Well,
like
that's good.
almost within a day, the murder threats completely receded. She's sort of great, and easygoing, but didn't want Eve in the present day. But I just felt like that's part of the story. I mean, she was like a cross between Norma Desmond and J.D. Salinger to me. And I guess I mean, I'm sure I say this in the book, but like the fact that she was in such a bad way. I mean, I always felt like it was like out of Greek mythology. I was finding this person who really didn't want to be found, and it was in sunny. She was living in West Hollywood. It was beautiful. It was sunny, but her place was dark, dank, dirty, like a cave. She was frightening, honestly frightening. And I was going to pull her out into the light, and it was kind of ugly at times, but I think but she wanted it too. It's like because the phone calls never ceased, and she was happy with the Vanity Fair thing, So it was, it's like that uncomfortable thing. It's such an intimate relationship. But there was always kind of a detachment for me because she was always my subject. My curiosity was a little bit unseemly, and she would let me do it. Like she would answer anything. But we never had like a human connection, and I always felt I did that with her sisters and her cousins and her boyfriends by proxy because I don't think she was capable of that by the time I got to her. So that was too long an answer, but
No, not at all. And what did she say about the book?
I don't believe she ever read it. She read the article, and we still talk. So I think she knew not to read it maybe, and I didn't tell her not to, but I didn't give it to her either. It's just too personal. I don't know. That was my feeling. I mean, I gave it to, for fact-checking purposes, I gave it to her sister, her cousins, and all that, and that all went quite well. Only with her sister initially was it a problem. But I felt like you had to be, I mean, I guess I probably said this in the book as well, but I felt like the way she was getting talked about was as like a Carrie Bradshaw, like as an Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City. And she was so much kind of, to me, she's a real artist and so much more drastic than that. And I felt that what she was in the present kind of was representative of that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
She wasn't looking for a Mr. Right. She wasn't looking to just settle down. She was extreme.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I should have asked before, does anyone have any questions? We're sort of getting toward our question moment, but I forgot to tell people to put questions in the chat. Would anybody, I'm going to give you guys a second. Oh, here you'll see my little comment when I was muted by the moderator. It was a very baby in the corner sort of moment.
We all have those.
I know.
It was like her favorite movie too, Eve.
Was it really?
Love Patrick Swayze.
That's amazing. Well, what's not to love?
What's not to love? I've got my kids, like my son has a Roadhouse, Patrick Swayze Roadhouse t-shirt.
Oh,
what's
really?
Not to love? Yeah. He's 4, it works.
Well, he'll come to learn more about it. Well, we'll see if anybody opines or pops in with any questions. I'll keep my eye on it. But was there anything so I'm sure when you wrote the magazine piece, did you know a book deal was going to come, or you thought you were done? Like you put 6,000 words, that's like a bit of an opus. And then was there anything then, like you weren't when you dug deeper, was there anything that you weren't
expecting? Everything was intriguing. Everything. I just wanted to know, I wanted to know about the Joe Heller thing. I wanted to know about that, and like, I wanted to know details, like how did she get into Rolling Stone? And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more about her mother and her father and, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I just didn't think it would take over. I mean, I said this to you already, but I thought it would be a book on Los Angeles and she would be the central connecting figure. But, she ate me up. That's how it worked,
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and lucky us, because the book is wonderful.
Oh, and, so nice, Katie.
Well, I thought it was really. And, I mean, I'm interested in, like, it's sort of hard to pull. I don't want to use the word promiscuity because I feel like there's a judgment to it, but it's sort of hard for a woman to pull off.
I know.
that sort of thing without, being destroyed, either having her confidence destroyed, having her career destroyed, having her reputation destroyed. And there aren't a lot of people who can, you know, have sex with a lot of men in an uncommitted way and turn that into a mystique and not,
No, you're right. Or look pathetic or used up or all that. Anyway, I know
yeah.
it's hard for a woman. I always used her sister. I used her sister. I mean, I felt like, I think I say in the book, but like Dorian Gray and the portrait of Dorian Gray, like Evie didn't seem to get hurt or wouldn't let herself, or I don't know. I don't know how
Mhm.
emotional she was with these men. Um, I always felt like she was living that kind of groupie life almost for material. She wanted to
Mhm.
push herself to extremes, and that was her way of kind of experiencing her time and place. Was just by kind of going all in terms of her social life. But as I said to you before, she would kick the men out early, and one guy, Michael Elias, was a boyfriend of hers, and he said he stopped taking Eve to parties because she wanted to get there before it got good. No, get there before it got started and leave before it got good. So she was always
Uh-huh.
very disciplined in her crazy way about her work habits. But her
Mhm.
sister, who had kind of also very wild in terms of like, she had sex with Ringo when the Beatles first came to America. Like it was a big thing to land a Beatle.
Yeah.
And it was with the Eagles and Brown, and had Roger Vadim had quite a wild sex life as well. But she would sustain damage. There would be abortions, and there would be horrible abortions, and kind of not being able to have a child after that. And she sustained damage, and I felt
Yeah.
that that was important because she and Eve went on parallel tracks, and Eve just seemed to skate through it. But the sister sustained damage.
It's really interesting because it's hard to, you do have to wonder how emotionally detached she would be not to sustain damage just because, you get your heart broken at the very least.
She just, and it's like, that portrait with Julian Wasser. She had a married boyfriend at 19, several married boyfriends at 19. One of them is this guy, Walter Haupt, who's this very important figure in the art world. And he started Ferris Gallery, kind of the first to show Andy Warhol. Then he was running the Pasadena Art Museum, and he was having getting Marcel Duchamp as this enormous get. And he was
Mhm.
having kind of the party of the century. He was having this huge LA party for Marcel Duchamp, and he didn't invite Eve because his wife was going to be there. So she took that naked photo with Duchamp to piss Walter off, you know. But that doesn't bespeak a broken heart to me. That bespeaks, she was going to put him in his place, and she was going to make him pay, and she did, and great. But you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying about the emotional damage? It was more surface with her, I felt.
Yeah. And it became then an iconic piece of art in its own
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Well done.
Well done, Evie. You always do. She has great instincts.
Yeah.
Her Trump
Yeah.
support notwithstanding, she has great instincts.
Well, this has been just such a delight.
A
Really, really
delight.
wonderful. And, we can't wait until you write another book so we can have you back here to talk
Katie,
with us
this
more.
was
It's
great.
just
This was so
been,
much fun. This
it
was
was,
great.
it was wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for spending your time with all of us and all the people who will watch afterward. And I will start the podcast tomorrow and I will
I
keep in
love
touch
it.
with you about it. I love
Dirty.
podcasts. So
Sorry.
I need something new. I told you I was listening this morning as I was walking. It's like one dude after another, and they're boring with no disrespect to dudes, but it was. And I was like, I need something great. So I feel like I found it. So
All
thank you
right.
so
Well, I
much.
love that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Diane.
Thank